And when we take out the motherboard, we can see corrosion all over this thing. I already removed this chip from the motherboard, and this chip contains all of my customer's data. My customer lost over 200 gigabytes of pictures, so let's see what we can do. When we test the chip in a reader, we can see all the partitions, and the health of the chip tests good. All of the data on this chip is encrypted, so the only way to recover the data is to get the phone to power on. So I purchased a used Galaxy S22 on eBay for parts, and what we're going to do is transfer all of the important chips from the old motherboard to the new one, and then we'll try to turn on the phone. First, we need to prep the new motherboard by removing the RAM that sits on top of the CPU. Then we can carefully lift the CPU from the motherboard without disturbing neighboring components. Lastly, let's remove the data storage chip from the board. Now we need to carefully clean off all the glue and solder from the motherboard, and we need to make all the solder pads flat so we can install my customer's chips. Okay, now that we have the new motherboard prepped, we can start working on my customer's motherboard. Let's carefully remove my customer's RAM and CPU. The CPU decrypts the data on the storage, so if it's damaged, all of my customer's data is gone. We need to use the perfect temperature and technique to remove this chip safely. Next, we need to clean the glue on the chips and make the solder pads flat so we can reball them with new solder. I like to use this wooden tool to scrape off all the glue because there's no chance of damaging the chips. See these tiny capacitors on the CPU? They're not needed to boot, so we'll just remove them. Next, let's rub some solder paste into the stencil and make some sexy balls. When I lifted the stencil, I was missing a few balls, so we can just make some extra balls and carefully solder them to the CPU. Soldering one ball at a time takes some practice, but we Gucci. Now let's check our work, and all the balls look even, so let's continue. Lastly, let's carefully reball the RAM with new solder. Okay, now we have all of the chips reballed with new solder, and the new motherboard prepped for intake. So let's carefully install the CPU, then let's solder the RAM on top of the CPU, then let's install the data storage chip, then lastly we need this tiny EEPROM chip that also controls encryption. Let's power on the phone, and boom, all of his pictures are saved. If you need something recovered, the link's in the bio. Peace.